When I was running Le Poussin, I worked every single shift that business was open. If I wasn't there, it wasn't open. And I would work 7 days a week, rarely have a day off. I was losing members of my team because I never let them have responsibility for what I was doing. I was employing good people. I mean, they were better trained chefs than me. I've never worked for another chef. I only ever worked for me. And I learned then, step back a little bit, show them what I wanted, let them show me what they could do. And it became much more team than individual. And that was a big learning curve.
Welcome to the How They Lead podcast, hosted by Benjamin Wade and Ben Stockham. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of high performance, showcasing examples of how individuals and teams can reach their full potential.
Together, they'll be inviting amazing guests who have defined or represented high performance in their own right, from world record breakers to individuals who have achieved first in their fields. The How They Lead podcast will showcase a diverse range of guests, each with their unique stories and insights to share. So join us as we challenge traditional ways of doing things, explore new ideas, methods and possibilities, and evolve the way people perform. Alex, thanks very much for joining us on our podcast, How They Lead. I'm really looking forward to this episode, and we'll delve into your background shortly. But you're one of many inspirational people that we've had onto our podcast to talk to us, where we can hear from your background and your unique experiences. And this is going to be no different. So welcome. Thank you for your time. I know that Ben's going to delve into a little intro and kick off this episode.
Yeah, Alex, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I think, we've had athletes, we've had coaches, we've had business people. We are yet to have a chef patron on our podcast. So it's going to give us another angle to leadership. So Alex Aitken, patron head chef of the Jetty. It'd be great to hear a bit about your story and where you started from up to today, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, bear in mind, I'm just going to hit my 65th birthday next week, so it could be a long story, but I'll try and cut it short. Born from Scottish parentage, father from Edinburgh, mother from Dunbar, which we'll come back to in a bit, but father in the RAF, so I was born in Aden, in today's world, that's Yemen, but I do think I'm Scottish and not Arabian. But travelled a lot with Dad in the Royal Air Force, which was brilliant. The best years were 3 years in Singapore, which were amazing, and probably what first turned me on to food, because the food was amazing. And then, normal schooling, grammar school, moved around a lot with the Air Force, and ended up in Southampton area, or Romsey, which is fairly local to where I am now, and muddled through the end of school. The year before school finished, I went up to see my grandmother. It was partly because I was being a bit of a hooligan, and they sort of sent me up to Scotland to Dunbar, and I got a trip out on a fishing trawler. Loved it. So I asked, got to go again and again. And after 2 weeks of being a T-boy, and this is age 15, and 2 weeks of being a T-boy, and they said, look, the lads have to have their holiday, and you're a big lad and you're helping us shoot and haul the nets. Could you do 4 weeks and cover the lads' holiday? And they said, we'll give you a half pay. And bear in mind, this is now 50 years ago, and half pay was £200 a week.
Wow.
Cash in hand. And so I said, yeah, I'll do it. School can wait. And so I delayed going back home and back to school. And I did those 4 weeks as a proper deckhand, shooting nets, hauling nets, on a fairly small trawler up and down the Firth of Forth. And I said, look, when I leave school next year, can I come back and do the season? They said, yeah. So as soon as I'd done my O-levels, I jumped on a coach straight back to Dunbar. My first job on leaving school was working on a fishing trawler, the Norwood, out of Dunbar. Amazing experience.
What a fascinating story.
Yeah. So how do you go from catching fish to chefing? How did you get there?
I came back to live with mother. Mother and father had gone different ways by then, and that was down Romsey way. Got a job in a restaurant to earn money, and primarily there was a waiter, and worked my way up to the waiter, senior waiter, restaurant manager, maitre d', and that was moving jobs and like everyone does in our industry. But it wasn't until I met this guy, Jean-Claude Denat, and his wife, Tessa, had a restaurant called Le Chanticleer. And I really got on well there and had a bit more structure to my life. And I'd met and married my wife by then as well, Caroline. And that they sold that restaurant, but I'd been running it for them. And they were selling it. And I took my wife, Caroline, up to London with my redundancy. And we ate at Le Gavroche, which was the only 3-star Michelin in the country. Blew most of the redundancy. But it was amazing. And I said, come on, let's go and open our own restaurant. And that's sort of where it starts. We found a little place in Brockenhurst, a little cafe it was, but we bought it. Caroline was then 8.5 months pregnant with son AJ, another Alex. And we opened a restaurant. And because Chanticleer was a nickname of cockerel, we called our restaurant Le Poussin, which is a spring chicken. And it was, we made money from day one. We had lots of interesting conversations with VAT inspectors and things like that. I didn't have a proper business background. I knew I could run a restaurant. But the other thing is, I bought 2 sets of chef's whites, a couple of cookery books. I went in the kitchen, and I'd never cooked before professionally. I hadn't done much cooking at home, I don't think. So Caroline, with a bump, was out front, meeting and greeting and taking orders. And I went in the kitchen and cooked.
Was that where your passion for food started, from that point when you bought those 2 chef whites, or was it back on board the boat? Were you cooking the catch?
I think I've always had a passion for food. I've always known good food and bad food. And and then working in restaurants, you end up learning about food, because unless you walk around with your eyes closed, you're an idiot not to learn and see how people are doing things. And the TV was full of starting to be full of food programs, not as big as now. And I loved Graham Kerr, Galloping Gourmet, and all those sorts of things. But I loved cooking, and it found me, and I found cooking. We then got some recognition from the Good Food Guide, and as it was then, the Eagle Rone. Then there was a drive to get a Michelin star, and that was hard. It was really hard, and so close yet so far. And had a monumental choice in my life in the middle of the 80s with Caroline, and I said, look, I'm done. And we'd found the buyer for our restaurant, an Indian restaurateur, and I was going to sell the front of the restaurant, but we'd expanded a little bit to the side and the back, and I kept the back on. I said, I'm just going to open a little 25-cover restaurant, cooking my food my way. And if you like it, eat it. If you don't, do what. And that's what we did. And 18 months later, I got that Michelin star. Shock. Jean-Christophe Novelli, great mate of mine and a 2 Michelin star chef at the time, he phoned me to tell me I got it. I was gobsmacked. And so that was it. We were doing 24 for lunch, 24 for dinner every single day, closed 2 days a week for days off. I was in the kitchen with a young lad. Caroline was in the restaurant with our eldest son, Justin. And then 1999 came, jumping forward, and I was just turned 40. And I thought, I can't just do this. There's no real end game, because it's only ever going to be 24 covers for lunch, 24 covers for dinner. We're having a great life, but there was no end game. And so I was offered a hotel called Park Hill, which I looked to buy. Bank manager said, look, you won't be able to buy it unless you can sell your restaurant. You won't be able to sell your restaurant and open up 10 miles down the road. No one in the right mind is going to let you do that. He said, find an investor, find another route. I went to 2 or 3 people, which were customers and friends, and one was a guy called Jim Ratcliffe. The hotel in particular, Park Hill Hotel, he had a fondness for. He used to stay there when he first moved to this area. And so we bought it in partnership, Caroline and Alex and Jim Ratcliffe. Took the Michelin star there and held it there for 5 years. Got planning permission, and I drove all the planning permissions and everything through New Forest District Council. Got planning permission, builders, contractors, architects. We set about to remodel it, ended up rebuilding it. And whilst we did that, I couldn't not work, because I loved my work and I need to keep my reputation. So I said to Jim, we need to buy another hotel. Jim was a man of wealth. And so we bought the Whitley Ridge. And I moved all my team, all my menus, everything from Park Hill to Whitley Ridge. Got my Michelin star there. So I had a Michelin star on 3 different properties, which was quite good. And whilst doing Whitley Ridge, we spent 70 million of Sir Jim now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe's pennies on building Limewood, which is the only 5-star hotel in the New Forest, and it's absolutely beautiful. And then we also converted Whitley Ridge into the Pig, with bringing Robin Hudson on. So that was another institute. And then I thought, I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I probably burnt myself out. So I also did a hotel in Courchevel in France, which I, again, project managed from the client perspective with Sir Jim's money. And I did his personal chalet in Courchevel as well, organising teams, interior designers, architects, builders, everything.
So that's a pretty like varied skill set, Alex, in terms of like chef, the creative side, the working under time pressure and running a team, but then the building, the
Project
redeveloping
manager.
side, project manager, etc. So I've got one question straight off. I know we haven't finished the journey, and I want us to get to the end, but there's a burning question in me straight away, which is it kind of ties into a question we ask every guest on the podcast, and that's, so what's your approach then to leading people? Like, what's your kind of core approach to how you lead people, whether it's, you know, on a remodeling of a 70 million pound hotel or whether it's in the kitchen? How do you do that?
I try to do it friendly. I'm a Taurian, and so I am quite stable and steady. However, if I don't get what I want, I become very bullheaded, bull-minded, and very stubborn, and I can be very, very tough. But I prefer to do it by getting people to join me on the journey. And project managing, I mean, as a chef, you project manage every day because you've got to get all the ingredients in. So it sounds a different skill set. It's not really. Just you're not dealing with ingredients which you do when you're a chef. When you're project managing building sites, you're dealing with materials.
And how do you ensure that people know what you require or the standards you require? Is that leading by example, or do you expect people to come?
100% lead by example, and especially in the early days, and when I was doing those projects, I'd like to be first in the meeting and last out the meeting. That's critical. Yeah, and running the restaurants, I direct more now than actually in and physically, run the kitchen. But when I was running my own restaurants, I was the first person in that kitchen and the last person out.
And do you have a sort of sense of the values that you live by? Because it sounds like hard work, dedication, almost a sense of purpose, especially on being on that fishing vessel back in the day. Those things really resonate with me from the way that you're describing it and seem to follow you through your career as well, especially that hard work, passion, dedication. Are there certain values that you live by, or do values come into how you operate?
I completely live by those values. I'm very lucky. I absolutely adore my work. I adore the creativity of cooking. I adore bringing teams up and motivating them. I mean, there's a young guy that when I took over the jetty in Mudderford, the young guy called Craig McCollum. He was sous chef under the head chef, and it was then run under Gary Rhodes' stewardship. And I was the replacement. And Gary's a much bigger TV personality chef, but I was a local personality chef, and I just brought local business, which is what it needed. But Craig was sous chef. I made him head chef. And this is 13 years ago, and I sacked Gary Rhodes as head chef because I didn't want, Gary does it like this. I didn't want that kind of atmosphere. But Chef Craig stayed with me. We've opened other jetties and other restaurants for Harbour Hotels. He's now the executive chef of the Christchurch Harbour Hotel. He's since got married, bought a house, had 2 children. And I think I helped him in that journey because with me, he's progressed so much in his job, he has done in his life, and he earns enough money to do all that. And those sort of those successes are big tick boxes in my life.
You can really see that passion in your eyes as well when you tell that story. You can hear yourself reliving those moments. It's nice to see, especially seeing that passion in your eyes from what we can see from here.
Yeah, and I think that I had a preconception about chefing, I think, and it wasn't a preconception about you, Alex. It was, maybe it's from like the Gordon Ramsay kind of, TV kind of shouty, lead the kitchen, rule with an iron fist. And there's a little bit of that you kind of shared, that, if you don't get things right, your standards, you can be quite bullish about that. But what I'm hearing from you is way more. You've said motivating, nurturing, providing people opportunities to develop their lives. So, like you said at the very beginning, you were quite lead from the front. How have you managed that transition yourself from lead from the front to, as you said, more direct and delegate?
That was really hard to let go. When I was running Le Poussin, I worked every single shift that business was open. If I wasn't there, it wasn't open. And then we went into the hotel and bought what was Park Hill, and I would work 7 days a week, rarely have a day off. And but I learned something then, because it was bigger and it was breakfast, lunch and dinner 7 days a week, throw in an odd wedding or two and conferences and things like that. What I learned then was I was losing members of my team because I never let them have responsibility for what I was doing. And I was employing good people. I mean, they were better trained chefs than me. I've never worked for another chef. I only ever worked for me. And I learned then to step back a little bit, show them what I wanted, and let them show me what they could do. And it became much more team than individual. And that was a big learning curve. And I have it today. I've got a great head chef at the Jetty in Southampton, and he tries to do everything. I keep saying to him, your team think you don't trust them. So you have to, even if they make a mistake and you're there to correct the mistake, but you have to trust and allow them to start doing what you do, because that's actually what they want to do. So, I took a change in life when I became more of a businessman, and working with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, you have to take a change in life because you're running left, right and centre, doing a million things at once.
Just on that, on your leadership style, I was just thinking as you were telling us your story and started with the Air Force. I mean, I can resonate with that, spending almost 12 years in the Air Force myself. So I was going through my officers training, and obviously you have to have respect, integrity, a sense of pride and purpose. Do you think yourself, being around that military sort of family way of working and lifestyle, has shaped, especially your initial younger years, into what you've now become?
100%. I mean, it's even down to going out and running a restaurant. I knew all about cutlery because, you went to the Christmas mess dinners for the family and you had all this silver cutlery and you had to learn what to use and where to use it from. Watching the parades and everything. I think it's that discipline. I mean,
the standards and discipline.
Tried Sea Scouts and I didn't like those, but I grew up with it happening all around.
Yeah. So you've instilled those standards and values, and that's reflected back into how you lead and how you operate today, making sure those standards are as high as possible. Yeah,
I mean, we've got an Australian who's just employed as a barman, and I shouldn't say this, but you can edit it. But every time I walk in, he goes, "G'day, mate." I just said, "Look, I'm really sorry. I am not mate. I am chef, or I'm Alex." And he went, "Oh." But he took it. I just couldn't face it.
I think there's some interesting, there's such richness for me in what you're saying. So Alex, for you, we some of our listeners will be people that hopefully we've worked with as well, and I think we often hear trust being pivotal and foundational in terms of building teams to achieve more than the sum of their parts. But actually something you just shared in terms of people getting in the way of creating that trust by trying to do too much themselves. And you shared earlier that actually there was an amount of attrition in your kitchen because you're employing good people who had skills, who wanted the opportunity to grow and develop. But actually there's always, as the person who starts something, there's always that temptation to say, well, I can do it better, faster, my way. So the quickest route from A to B is a straight line. And the reality you shared is actually when you're employing good people, we need to role model that teamship. Like we need to role model that we can be a good teammate and actually we can follow them sometimes to give them the opportunity to succeed. I think that's a really interesting thing for our listeners to take away.
What we do, and I think that it is key. And yeah, it's like running any business or any sport. I mean, I did a conversation like this live in front of training football managers. The FA asked me to do it. They had a whole group of training coaches, and they wanted me to talk about what I do in the kitchen and how I lead kitchen teams. And it's not that different from leading a football team.
I liked the example that you mentioned about followership when we first started talking. You mentioned that you had to actually look up the definition of followership and work out what it was. But then in your intro, you went to explain exactly what you did in the kitchen, and that was followership to a T, really, knowing and being humble enough to know that the experts are those working within the kitchen, and actually they're teaching you sometimes, and you're getting that. So, and that for me was something that we can take to our clients and use that exact case study to explain what effective followership is. But you see that on a daily basis. Do you see times or kitchens where followership isn't working so well?
Yeah, I think those are the kitchens of old. And I think, and you mentioned earlier on about the Gordon Ramsay, the kitchen nightmares. I mean, that's TV producers making Gordon behave like that. Gordon was a tough man in the kitchen. And before Gordon, Marco was even tougher. I mean, Gordon worked under Marco. Gordon and Marco are both good mates. And we don't see each other very often. I see Marco more than Gordon because Marco comes into Southampton. But back in those days, you run a kitchen through fear. I sent someone to go and work for Gordon or for Marco. And in actual fact, they liked it on the CV that he worked there, but they hated it because they wouldn't be allowed to do anything. They'd be shouted at. But in today's world, and I think it's interesting, it's happened a lot since COVID. COVID and all that furlough, you can work, you can't work and everything, has changed the work-life balance in my world phenomenally. Because chefs were born to work 15-hour days, 6-7 days a week. Now, no way. They all want a 4-day week. They all want to work. They'll still do 12 hours a day, but they want 4 days a week and want 3 days off. When I first started, you did a 6-day week.
And do you think that is the critical moment when the kitchen's changed from being that sort of ruled with an iron fist to actually let's nurture and empower the teams and work more together?
Yeah, there were chefs that worked nicer anyway. I mean, Anton Mosiman was a lovely man, very calm, Swiss, and ran very good, productive kitchens, schooling people, teaching people. And I suppose I always think when I look back at when I was the shouting, hollering one, and if ever I shout and holler in today, which is very rare, I actually think it's a very poor part of me. And normally you're shouting and hollering because you've got it wrong and you're blaming somebody else. And if you haven't taught them how to do it and then you shout at them for not doing it, you're the mistake, not that person. And I think, and I see it sometimes in the kitchen, and I'll notice a head chef or a sous chef shout at a younger member of staff or tell him off. And I'll watch and I'll wait, and I'll find something to say, oh, that's great, thank you. And it's sort of, then that head or sous chef or whoever's said something quite tough, that I just will get him to one side so no one can see him. And I'll turn around and say, before tonight's service, you have to at least 3 times tell him he's done something good. They look at me and I said, you were right to bollock him. You were right, because it was wrong. But I don't want that young person going home with that bad thought in his head. I want them going home with good thoughts. And there's 2 reasons for doing that. It's one, because you want loyalty and you want that person to enjoy work, because we do work long hours. But also it's security, because if you've really pissed him off, he's not going to come to work tomorrow.
Yeah, it's like again, like it's kind of something bubbles up in my head when you say that. And I remember a really great leader that I worked for, who's a role model for me. I was leading my first ever team. It was back when I was working for England Rugby, and I had my first team of people that I was leading. And I was talking about when I was going to have my one-to-one meetings with them. And the person said to me, they said, always do your one-to-ones on a Friday if you can. And I was thinking, well, Friday, really, I've got stuff to do with like myself on a Friday. And I was like, what's the reason for that? And they said, well, the Friday one-to-ones, first thing, if you're giving people feedback and receiving feedback from them, that's part of being a leader. You need to have those moments, whether, you're in the kitchen and it's at the end of a service or whatever. But for us, it was Fridays. We were out, in the field training, etc. So Fridays was our point to come together. And they said a really similar thing, that actually you want to have that moment where you send them off for the weekend knowing what they've achieved this week. Even if they've had a crappy week and there's stuff you need to pick up on, pick it up. But try and do that as close in proximity to the moment they've done it as possible. But we want to send people away at the weekend knowing what they've done well, why we think they did it well, so that they can be productive and chill out over the weekend, but also they can come back on Monday. And I think a lot of leaders in business forget about that. That actually, this is a one-to-one. I'm going to give you some feedback, and not think about, like, staff and employees are the lifeblood of a business, aren't they?
Oh, 100%.
Ben mentioned role models as well there, and it'd be really interesting just to see if you have a role model or did have a role model, and did that person change when you went from maybe shouty Alex to more sort of humble and more not caring Alex, but it seems like there's a shift in your approach to leadership, and there's a certain point that changed. But did your role model change as well?
Actually, I've never really had a strong role model. I've got chefs I admired for their cuisine and what they've done. Yeah, and that's from the greats of the Albert Roux off Gavroche, from to Nico Ladenis off Chenico. These were 3-star Michelin chefs, and I got to know them and talk to them a lot. Then I suppose one big guy in my life would be Jim Ratcliffe, Sir Jim. And it was interesting because when we got into business together, I was still the Michelin star chef, driving for the utmost perfection, and gone from 24 covers to a hotel, and wanted this hotel with 60 covers and weddings and things to do as well. I wanted that hotel to have a Michelin star. And Jim heard that I'd hired and fired a few people, and he pulled me to one side and said, look, that's not the Ineos way. And I ended up having a bit of a row with him, saying, well, I'm not Ineos, I'm Alex Aitken and Le Poussin you bought into. And I said, and to be honest, I don't hire and fire because I want to be that person. I had to be in that position, in that particular situation. But, I got up and cooked breakfast for all the customers. I washed up afterwards, and I cooked lunch and I cooked dinner, and I went home at 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to do that, but that instant I had to. And we sort of understood. We had a bit of a real headlocking, but understood each other more. And then looked at how he treated his staff and the way that Ineos worked. And I think that did probably steer me in a slightly different way. That's not to say he's not very tough, and if he wants to fire someone, he'll fire someone.
And you mentioned there about focusing, or your sole focus for quite some time was getting that Michelin star. How did that affect the rest of your businesses? Quite often with the clients that we've got, becoming task focused on something, and that becomes your passion for whatever length of time, often leads to the detriment of others in the team, other individuals in the team, or the business. So how did that affect you, concentrating so much on that one goal? Or did it affect the rest of the businesses?
Well, at that time, when I was really driving for it, it was only me and the wife, and it was very family. And I suppose it affected us a little bit, but 46 years later, we're still married. But when we went to the bigger business, I still wanted it, but I had started to delegate. So I think I kept it fairly sane. People wanted to work with me because I had the Michelin star, and I think I was tough but fair. And so, though we drove for it, it was in a quite a relaxed way.
It's interesting. You the tough but fair is like resonates with me with something you said earlier. We said about the I think it was the bar manager or the barman, saying "G'day, mate," and you said, I'm not your mate. I'm Alex, or a chef. And I think in leadership, there's that professional.
Can I just stop you there? Because I particularly didn't use that exact phrase. I didn't want to say, I am not your mate. I said, don't call me mate, call me chef or call me Alex. Because to say to someone, he's quite new with us and he's affectionate and good guy, to say, the old Alex would have turned around and said, I am not your mate. Who the fuck do you think you are? But the new Alex chooses a bit more carefully, and it's going to be a blunt confrontation. Don't call me mate, call me chef or Alex. But if I just said I'm not your mate, that's putting a really tough barrier in front of someone, and the chances are he'll leave there in today's world. And I did want Max, he's a good barman, but I also got to educate him. He can't call people mate because it's Australian. But we'll get there.
That's that sense of pride and the passion and the standards that we've talked about as well, isn't it? Having those standards to call each other by either the formal roles or chef.
Yeah, and I think
military as well.
Thank you for picking up on the change in terminology there, because it underlines the point I wanted to come to, which is there's a need in leading for professional distance, but you don't want to put a hard barrier up. And I think you just described that really, really eloquently there, that actually it's that change in positioning of what you say, that actually there's a respect bit, but we don't want to put a hard barrier up, which I think is really important. So fast forward to today, and you've already mentioned the jetty and the journey there. I have to say, we both live very close to the jetty in Muddyford, and we're big fans. I love the food, I love the service. We've celebrated there. It's one of our favourites. And you mentioned Limewood as well, which is a jewel in the New Forest. You're now in a role where you're leading leaders. So you said directing already earlier when we were talking about. So how do you? Because this would be really helpful to some of our listeners who are they've led teams before, but now their businesses are growing and they're moving to stepping once removed again to leading leaders. How do you have an impact in a service on the quality of the service, etc., whilst you're not directly leading, but you're empowering someone else?
It's not a tough question. I do it, and it's how to put it into words. I suppose there's a lot more. I still lead by example, and I will still, for example, if I go into the restaurant and there's a coffee cup on a table, if I'm walking past that coffee cup, going to the kitchen, I'll take it to the kitchen, and but if another leader will actually look at it, and this tends, especially the new leaders, they think they've risen above that status. So I've led by example because I've done it. But it's interesting. If I said to one of the new leaders, "Oh, get that coffee cup moved," he will go and find a junior member of staff to pick the coffee cup, and he'd probably go to the kitchen to find someone to then come do it. I said, "Look, no, you are a leader. You are now a restaurant manager, but you still have to be grounded with your team and work with them. And why didn't you just pick up the cup and take it with you? Yeah, you're just." So I'm leading by example, but also I make notes all day long, and then I'll sit down, talk to them, go through, not an appraisal, but go through things, like with the restaurant manager telling, the antipode, and he's got to stop his familiarity because that's the jetty in Southampton's in a 5-star hotel, and you can't call a 5-star hotel customer a mate. It's you get away with it at the pig will call you dude, mate. lad, but you can't in an environment that I work in.
Something you mentioned there that actually we haven't touched upon, but we have in every other podcast we've done, was sort of debriefs and reflection. And you mentioned reflection and taking notes, but actually that's something that has only just occurred to me in the kitchen. Where you haven't got much time, do you allow time for a debrief after the service or after a really busy evening? How do you do that in the kitchen environment or the hospitality environment?
First of all, it starts at the beginning of every service. Sort of say 15 minutes before 12, 15 minutes before 6, there will be a briefing. And that briefing will be telling all the teams who's coming in, what people have got birthdays, anniversaries, special customers, and then they could be a wonderful customer that's going to buy the most expensive wine and most expensive dishes, or it could be the special customer that is a royal pain in the arse, but they're still a customer and you've still got to look after them. We've accepted the booking. And so you have a briefing before every service. And then, yes, you have a debriefing, especially if something's gone wrong, but also if something's gone remarkably well. We're dealing with feedback more today than ever before because of the keyboard warriors and social media, the TripAdvisors, Google reviews. And we will pull all these out. We will go through the teams, not every day, but we will go through them on what we've done wrong, what we've done right. And it's often a process. But the most, and I think this is really important in any business, is communication. I think virtually every complaint we have will lead back to a lack of communication somewhere along that line, where something hasn't been communicated correctly.
And do you analyse each complaint that you get? Do you dig down into what happened, to that root cause analysis? Do you spend time to do?
And the first thing you've got to do is have humility, because we all think we're perfect, and we might even be right, but we still have to analyse it to make sure we are right. But if you don't look at your wrongs, you're never going to make them right. And then, if you want to improve, you want to drive your business, you want to make your business better, then we have to review them.
I think that's really important in the restaurant scenario with your debrief. Is that like a collegiate atmosphere? Is everyone giving and sharing feedback, or does that come from the leaders, the managers? How does it work?
At times we'll do a complete team debrief, but generally it's between the managers. I mean, most of what we call the runners, most of the younger team, they just want to have a glass of wine at the end of the evening and disappear. But it's quite good sometimes to have that glass of wine with a conversation about service, what went well, what went wrong.
I think between Ben and I, we've sat in some pretty impressive debriefs, like the Red Arrows, the military, you with the rugby background. But it'd be really interesting to come in and, if that was right, to sit with you and listen to one of your debriefs. That's one area that we've never done before. That would be really interesting just to see how that's run. Like one sector that'd be so interesting, fascinating to see.
Yeah, I think so. Alex, there's one final piece of our conversation which is really important to us, which is your West Peak example. So we founded the business and named it West Peak based on the concept that people kind of get a level of skill or experience and think they've reached the summit of mastery of their craft, and they realize that that's actually a false summit. And when they put it into practice, they're like, wow, there's actually a whole lot more I need to learn about this. So I'd love you to share with us, if you could, and reflect back on a West Peak moment that you've had in your career.
Oh, I mean, the obvious one would be very easy, that once you've got your one Michelin star, it's even harder to get number 2 and number 3. But I think once I got the 1 star, I reached that peak. So that's not really, that peak. So where have I gone somewhere when, I suppose it's when I first started out. I thought I was just going to open a restaurant. I was going to start cooking and earning money. And then this whole raft of business planning, spreadsheets for banks, and that whole Yeah, the VAT inspection we had, because we haven't filled out a VAT return since we opened. And yeah, luckily in those days you weren't fined. So it was, my peak was opening and running a restaurant, being a really nice host, cooking great food was easy. But it's the business side. And I mean, in the end, I've been very successful on the business side as well. I mean, the Jetty was a failing business when it was rowed south and losing 100,000 a year. I can tell you now, it makes far more than that year in, year out. It's a much more success. So, yeah, I suppose that was my. Yeah, you think you think you're doing a great job, and then you find there's more to do behind that job. And I think every service ends up being like that in some ways.
Yeah.
One example I thought you were going to say was achieving the Michelin star was sort of your summit, but actually maintaining it and not losing it was actually really hard. So I can imagine you sort of sit on your haunches having received it, and then you're like, oh, that's the hard work done. But actually, it's not. There's even more work to continue.
Much more hard work to keep it. And I suppose when I walked away from my own restaurant at Poussin, which had the Michelin star, and we were going to go for a Michelin star at Limewood. When I walked away and said, look, I'm done in. I'm going to go back. I want to go back to cooking, and that's why I fell in love with the location of the Jetty and created the Jetty. But I've lost where I was going with that. But the running the business is now really my passion, and growing people. So, the other thing is going to what I'm doing now, cooking great fish, running great little restaurants, and not worrying about the Michelin star is a lot of weight off my shoulder. So, the toughest thing with having a Michelin star is the second peak is trying to maintain it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think I look at this conversation and your journey, your career journey so far. And I see someone now, you said developing people a number of times and giving them opportunities so they can thrive in their lives, not just their careers. And your ability to flex from, someone who wants to be an exceptional chef to someone who's been a really successful business person, people developer, as well as exceptional chef. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really enjoyable.
Thanks for joining us on the How They Lead podcast.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode and learned something new about the world of high performance.
If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And don't forget to subscribe to the How They Lead podcast on your favourite platform so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, keep pushing yourself to reach your full potential and evolve the way you perform.
And remember, just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean doing it a new way can't work.